Today, we're going to talk to you about cybersecurity threat trends that we saw in 2023 and get into what we think might be around the corner for 2024. And today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Monique Bardwell, who is the head of strategic and response services at Field Effect. So, you might be asking yourself, what is a strategic and response service? So at Field Effect, we basically have two major product lines. We have our Covalence product, which is managed detection and response of network, endpoint, and cloud-based services. And then on the other side, we have the strategic and response services. So the strategic side would look like things like cybersecurity maturity assessments, incident response preparation, and tabletop exercises. We also have security assessments there that Monique team gets to do, phishing simulations, penetration testing. And then the big one, and what we're going to be focusing on mostly today, which is that she also gets to deal with all of our incident response work over on that side as well. So that would be the response part. And me, I'm Alyssa Prento. I'm a senior cybersecurity analyst here at Field Effect. I spend most of my time right now helping small to medium enterprises on their cybersecurity journey and doing a lot of outreach and education like we're doing here today, so we can enable you guys to make good decisions related to your cybersecurity. As mentioned before, we are going to look at cybersecurity threat trends in 2023. So we wanted to give you guys today a scene from the trenches, give you guys a sense of what we've actually been seeing in our incident response work, and then those trends and patterns that we were following throughout 2023. And we wanted to also give you guys a few strategies to protect yourself. We do see a lot of the same things over and over, so we've been able to apply a lot of strategies to help out there. And we also get so we have a lot of good ideas that we're gonna share with you today on how to protect yourself. And then we're going to get into a few predictions for 2024. And then, maybe in 2025, we can come back and see how right we were about all those. We're going to start off by just doing a high level and introducing to what the most common types of incidents are that we saw last year. I do want to say before we get started, it's important to take a moment and talk about the nature of incident response work at Field Effect. Most of the incident response work we do actually comes externally in response to insurance or supporting partners, vice from existing Covalence manage and detection and response clients. Monique, is there anything else you wanted to add there about the nature of the incident response work we do here?
So we certainly provide incident response for victims who contact us because they're having issues or they've noticed anomalous or malicious activities within their network. We obviously, in our monitoring, do also detect attacks because we cannot stop attacks, and we do react to them. We do see similar trends in between both. The difference here between the two kind of sets of, I'll say, organizations is, is monitoring is in place or is monitoring out of place? And that's kind of key. So the two main incidents that we've seen where victims have contacted us over the last year have been and continue to be ransomware or extortion-based attacks, where a threat actor gains access to a network, extracts or removes data, exfiltrates data, and then deploys ransomware to really inhibit or prevent kind of restoration. But at the same time, because they've taken the data, they can extort via ransom, so that they prevent, so that they can convince a victim not to pay them, so that their data doesn't get published. And then we see a lot of business email compromises, and those really lead to financial fraud. So someone gains access, is attempting to, impersonate or social engineer, I'll say, a financial interaction in an attempt to get to redirect payment from a client to the company, from the client to the threat actor or to the cyber criminal. So those are the two things we see the most. We obviously see other ones as well, but those stand out in terms of what happened in 2023.
You were noting the extortion aspect of the ransomware. I'm curious, is that new? Is that a trend did we see that last year as well? Historically, has ransomware had a focus on extortion, or?
At the beginning, I think, when ransomware first started, that wasn't the case where, people didn't exfiltrate data, they just ransomed and expected recovery. But now, people relied on backups, or organizations relied on backups to be able to recover, and hence data exfiltration. And then that kind of ransom or the threat of publication became larger, but It's not a new trend, but it's definitely kind of an indication of how threat actors are always, changing their tactics in order to benefit their end goal, which is money.
That makes sense. So let's get a bit more in the weeds now. Let's talk about some of the initial access trends that we saw.
The first thing a threat actor wants to do is they want to gain access to your network or to your environment, to the email that is being used or that's being compromised. So from a network-based compromised or attacks, what we see here is things that are common and not surprising in a way, but they are still misused or abused by threat actors. So exposed services, we see quite a bit of remote desktop that's being exposed, and associated with weak credentials or leaked password. Those two give a threat actor quite a way into the network, because I can simply remote desktop RDP into the network, and then I've got an initial foothold, and that's all I really care about at the beginning. We also see things like malvertising campaigns. Those still happen where a user or an employee is doing a search online, and then the search result that comes out it seems legit. They click on it, they download a PDF that looks legitimate. It's either that website that they clicked on was compromised by a threat actor or was just simply used for that purpose. I download a malicious file that I think is okay. I open it. A threat actor has an initial foothold. We see quite a bit of this. We've seen more of this recently. I'll say email hijacking, where a threat actor, there's a trusted conversation between myself and Alyssa, and we have a business that is kind of ongoing. Somebody gains access to Alyssa's potentially email, or they impersonate Alyssa, and then they kind of interject and they attach a malicious attachment to the email. Alyssa sends me the email, and I think, oh, it's just Alyssa, and I trust her, and I click, and then they have that initial. And obviously, the last thing I'll mention is vulnerable services. And that's, obviously, patching that things fall behind. But what we see a lot more of here is in kind of like home developed or organizational developed web applications. And where there's a vulnerability potentially in the code, and a threat actor discovers the vulnerability and takes advantage of it, and through that gains an initial access. On the business email side, it's all about kind of getting access to Monique's mailbox. And so to do that, you have to trick me into clicking on a phishing link, or, that takes me to a credential harvesting page. And, then from there, I kind of get tricked into entering my passwords and potentially also bypassing MFA. We do see some of that where threat actor is able to kind of send an MFA challenge and then use that. And obviously, always brute force and password spray attacks. They still exist and they still happen. Those are kind of the main things that we've seen, I will say, over the last year.
With the email hijacking, that seems particularly interesting to me, because that would circumvent, right, a lot of the security you would have in place to stop any type of malicious email or phishing email that came in, because the hijack is a legitimate account, right, that the system would have seen before, and in a sense, trust to a certain extent.
Yeah, that could certainly be the case. Kind of threat actors, we always want to think about kind of the life cycle of a threat actor within a network or within a kind of whatever they're compromising. And if we don't stop them at the first page, then the second stage, and those are important. But certainly, initial accesses are could be harder to detect, right? Because they could look normal, and that makes them harder.
To get in, how to stop them, or at least how to mitigate. Can we get into a couple of things that people might be able to do to stop these threat actors from getting that initial access on their system?
Certainly can, yes. So some of those really, this is not going to be surprising to a lot of the people listening, is limit your external threat surfaces. So, do we need all the exposed services to be public? And monitor them. Like, what do we have in place? What are the security controls do we have on those services? If I have, whichever RDP enabled, is there anything else I could add to RDP to add another security control if RDP is necessary? So how do I do that? Can I put VPN in place? All that kind of stuff. User education, you'll see that everywhere else in this slide, in this talk. We'll talk about that quite a bit. And it's really, it's up to organizations to educate their users. And so really, how do we help people become more cyber aware? How do I help our employees become more cyber aware so that they are not making the mistakes, that they double check and kind of say, this is odd. And we'll talk a bit about that. And obviously, I'll say, from a threat surface, update operating systems and applications. If we look at what we see, we do still see quite old operating systems that are involved and that are compromised. And that always gives the threat actor just a bit more advantage than we'd like them to have. For the business email side, I think a lot of it is quite a bit we could do here, obviously from anti-phishing solutions. So, that detect MFA and conditional access on accounts, do that. That is, even though MFA could be bypassed, it does kind of makes it harder for a threat actor to do this. You'll see here user education warnings in statements and emails. Like you typically get emails from this address. And if you're suspicious about something, verify it. So if Alyssa's asking me to change the accounts all of a sudden, like, should I? Like, this is a bit weird. And so a threat actor will social engineer that conversation with a client or with a compromise in pretending to be the victim and talking to the client. So how do we then kind of have our spidey senses up so that we can just call the person potentially and say, look, did you ask us to do this? Are you sure you want us to transfer $1 million out? That's important. Obviously, phishing simulations. That's a good way to test, to educate users, to kind of say, like, are they able to detect something odd? And then continuous monitoring, like you'll see continuous monitoring throughout. Security monitoring is important for all of these mitigations. And I would say if you can't do all of these things that we're asking or could be done, at minimum, we want to have security monitoring in place. It's a lot to do, but sadly, we always want to try to keep ahead of the cyber criminal.
It's funny, you said something there that kind of resonated with me. It's funny how much we don't want to just pick up the phone, right? Like, even though we see something that's kind of wrong, it's like we're always so hesitant to actually talk to somebody. But, as you've seen in your work, right? Because I know that you've dealt with some financial crime stuff as well, where it could have been stopped if the person just thought that's odd and picked up the phone, right? We've actually seen many cases, if I recall, where that one step would have actually saved the company from losing a bunch of money.
And in many cases, that stuff can stop, does stop, but they just detect it too late. So, and then it's kind of, you become, then becomes up to the banking system, which does have a number of steps in place to kind of block. So you may still be able to block a transfer, but it's kind of internally, how do we detect it? The earlier we detect it, the easier it is on an organization.
Yeah, because at that point, if you can contain it earlier on, right? Like, it's not going to be as big, right?
Yeah, you don't have to come and hire me, right? To kind of hire my team to do the investigation.
There you go. Speaking of which, we focused on the initial access here. So let's get to the next bit, which is, what were some of the trends that we were seeing related to, so once they get on, so they're able to get on via the initial access, what type of trends were you seeing related to propagation and persistence? Like, what were the threat actors doing once they got on there?
If I'm a threat actor or a cyber criminal, I kind of want to make sure I can continue advancing what I want to do so that I can get to that point, which is, how do I get more money? And so on a network-based side, I'll say, is that we're seeing, so user execution. So user execution, it simply means that I clicked on that PDF that Alyssa sent me, and that PDF executed. It's not, that is the method. It's like it was triggered by me, the user, to do that execution, which makes it harder to detect because it kind of like, it's me. The other thing that we see quite a bit of, and I think we'll continue to see a lot of it, is threat actors use living off the land techniques. So that means operating systems have functionalities that allow threat actors to do their things, from commands, from PowerShell. They need to gain execution. I need to be able to execute, let's say, the code, the malware that is going, or my C2C node, my command and control software, so that I could gain access and continue to persist within the network. I need to be able to execute. Another point of execution or maintaining access is obviously RDP, because we'll see it. If I can RDP the first time to connect, I can always continue to RDP. So, detection, the lack of detecting of anomalous or malicious RDP connections gives the threat actor a way for them to maintain access. The other thing we see, which we see quite a bit of, threat actors use legitimate tools. So remote access and administration software is used from AnyDesk, Screen Connect, you name it, the varieties out there. So really, this is what they use because it looks legitimate. It's not detected by, antiviruses. It looks normal, and it does allow them to operate very quickly. So they know, like we've seen very complex attacks that within 2-3 days, a threat actor has a number of systems, compromised, and even ransomware within a small period. And for lateral movement, I'll say, and transfer within the network, we still see network shares being used, PS exec being used, and lateral tool transfer to allow them to move from one system to another so that they can find where are the gems, right? They want to identify where those gems are. They want to be able to do that. And they do quite a bit of that to be able to solidify and maintain access. On the business email compromise side, again, user execution is a way, because what we see here is quite a bit of, they don't necessarily render the website on a server somewhere. They render it locally within your browser, and that redirects off to their infrastructure. So there's a bit of that we see, kind of, proxying techniques. We see misuse of account delegation. So that's a simple way to explain that. I have I work with Alyssa, and I say, Alyssa, can you have access to my mailbox because we work closely together, and I want you to have full access. If my account gets compromised and I have access to Alyssa's account, well, guess what? I can reach into Alyssa's account and compromise her account, and then I can pretend to be Alyssa. So there's a bit of that. We don't see that very often, but it does happen. Use for phishing campaigns. So if they compromise my account, they can then use that account to send more phishing emails to everybody I work with, or every partner I work with, or every client I work with. So again, it's about how do they continue spreading their activities, and then obviously use a valid accounts and authentication mechanisms, right? So here is they're using my account, they have my password if I don't have MFA, and if I have MFA and they've been able to kind of get that information, they then are using a session cookie or other authentication tokens to be able to maintain access to my account without having to challenge me with another MFA challenge. So it can get quite complex, but really they want to be in there. They know, I guarantee you, they know they have a specific time period before something is going to get detected, and they want to operate fast.
That makes perfect sense. It's interesting because with the living off the land type of technology, right, that's challenging for us as defenders because it's not kind of the simple things. It's not, known bad malware.exe that they're using to do this propagation, right? They're because they're blending in, it forces us to get better with our like user behavior analytics and stuff we're looking at on top of that. So it's like you said, that kind of constant feedback loop that we're in with the threat actor. So let's get in some specifics though on how we can mitigate some of this work.
I think a lot of it is really about the security solutions we have in place, and really understanding what is normal and what's not normal within an environment, if it's a cloud environment or a network-based environment. Because right now we are looking at threat actors, kind of using what's available, using known softwares, legitimate softwares. Like, we want to kind of focus on the behavioral changes within the network and the threat changes. So we need to understand what threat actors use and then develop techniques to detect that behavior and the threat versus I'm just going to statically look at things. Now, obviously, signature-based detections, and you can see there are like 2 stars on next to that. That is still important, but on its own, it's not going to be enough. So it is always going to be a combination of both. And I think what we're seeing when somebody's using PowerShell, and what PowerShell is, every organization needs it. It's available on every system. then how do I detect when PowerShell is bad versus PowerShell is good? Or it's used, PowerShell is being used for something bad or something good. So it's all about understanding the behavior and how do we detect it, but also anomalous activities, like what is normal, what's not normal. If I never use any desk within or Screen Connect or whichever remote access tool within my network, am I able to detect when a new one is installed or when a new one is being used? That's kind of what we mean there, is like what is normal for my administrators and what's not normal. On the business email side, mitigations obviously are user education. As we said earlier, it's going to come out throughout. Malware and malicious file detections and cloud services, because threat actors may use my account to upload malware to, for instance, if it's Microsoft 365 to SharePoint or anything like that. The disabling of legacy authentication protocols, we still see that. They do, there may be a service that is required for that or is being used. Well, that gives the threat actor a way to bypass MFA if I have MFA. So, if something is not really needed and it has a type of vulnerability, let's not use it. And if we do need it, then let's put a monitoring in place so that we can know when it's being maliciously or anonymously used. And then, if monitor suspicious accesses, if I'm here in Ottawa, and then a minute later I log on and I come out of, South America, well, I didn't travel that fast. So what happened here? Is it me? Is it somebody else? It could be me. I could have easily VPN'd, but it's kind of like verifying, is this legitimate or not? And then continuous monitoring for everything, right? Like how do we continue that, ensure that we are maintaining that level of, I'll say, oversight on the network.
So I think the next thing we're going to look at, because we specifically were talking about ransomware in the context of how we've been seeing this spike in the data exfiltration and extortion, thought we would talk a little bit right now about some of the trends that you were seeing related to data exfiltration this past year, get into some of so look at the techniques that we see the cyber criminals using, and then some of the techniques we've been able to use to discover them.
Really, the main thing that we continue to see in network-based compromises is, normal data synchronization tools. Some of them could be valid, it could be synchronizing to the cloud, and some of them could be malicious, but rclone, megasync, and anything kind of that type is used often by threat actors to allow to just transfer files out. There are different techniques that they use in terms of staging data or anything like that to prepare, but we do see those are kind of all under one. A good way to detect that is obviously anomalous activity detection. Like if rclone is not expected or megasync is not expected, then we want to look at that. We know, for instance, when we monitor through Covalence, we know that rclone is bad. We actually have an analytics that look for that, and kind of depending on I'll say that how the client wants us to respond, we would block that if we were to see it. But we see that quite often in threat actor activities, and especially when an IR comes in to us, when somebody's compromised and they engage us, we obviously do the forensic investigation, but we also deploy Covalence to monitor. And this is where the monitoring activity becomes key for us to allow us to kind of, if threat actors continuously on the network, then can we block that activity? And then we always look at large data transfers. So how much data is coming in and out? What is normal? What's not normal? Sometimes the big issue here we face in doing forensic analysis is sometimes retention of firewall data is not there, or something is detected too late and it's overwritten. But large data transfer is important. So part of your continuous monitoring that you want to put in place is can I detect large data transfers? On the business email side, so in most cases they want to commit financial fraud. So we don't, but in some cases they do want to see what's it could be intellectual property, it could be sensitive information they want to get out. That is probably through gaining access to my account, you can gain access to my SharePoint, and then you can gain access to all the data I have access to. It could be confidential, company information or financial information about my organization. And they could simply, legitimately, legitimate service to exfiltrate data, just kind of move it out. They could change the properties on a file and say, now it's shareable with whoever, and send, use my email account to send it to theirs, and just simply do a send of the data, and then delete that email. So now, unless I look at your logs, I can't, a user won't see that. From a detection kind of, I'll say, discovery techniques here it's again anomalous activities, like what is normal, what's not. I know this sounds quite repetitive at this stage of us saying the same thing, but can we monitor if a document visibility is changed? Like if all of a sudden now I'm sharing a document or a folder publicly and somebody can access it. Can we monitor anomalous file downloads from SharePoint or other services? That kind of gives you an indication of, hold on, like Monique, did you download that much data? Did you intend to? And that could be normal, right? That could be very valid as part of your business. And so how do we just kind of confirm that it is legitimate and not malicious?
At the end of the day, right, the threat actors the cyber criminals are really looking for any data that you might think is valuable. And I think from what I've seen and what you've seen is that they'll just start pulling kind of everything off, hoping that they kind of hit on some of those gold nuggets that you're willing to pay to not have them released, right? And they do look for that information, but usually you are going to see, like in part of the work, a spike, right? You're going to see an anomaly in what is the norm.
Before data is exfilled, they'll do searches, right? They are going to look for that. If there's a file server, they're definitely going to hone onto that. So that there are things that are still, going to let us know that somebody's interested, but it's really how do we then detect it and alert on it.
We're going to look a bit now. We have talked about this a bit throughout, but we're going to have a little focus here on some of those defense evasion techniques we talked about earlier. We'll just kind of round it out, look at the techniques and the discovery techniques of that.
On the defense evasion side, a threat actor wants to remain undetected for as long as they can. And that does mean that they kind of behave like me, like you. They use operating system techniques or tools that are normal and expected. So there's ways to do that. But they also do some things that are more sophisticated, or kind of, I'll say, not necessarily sophisticated, but they do try hard. And I would say in the majority of the incident response investigations we look at, we don't see just one. We see a number of techniques. And so if one doesn't work, they'll try it again, or they'll try something else. So we definitely see disabling of security software. That is something that happens. And it's funny, like they sometimes we see them run the ransomware. The ransomware may get detected by, based on its name, by the security software that's in place, and then they'll go and change the name and it bypasses, or they may then go and disable the security software to then be able to bypass the detection. And really at that stage, they're at the final end of that compromise, and they just really want to operate quickly. So they do that. They may delete the security files completely so that, maybe the AV won't work, the antivirus won't work. As a result, we have seen that. And definitely we see them adding exceptions to certain folders. So if I have a certain AV product, I can add an exception saying this folder is do not monitor or alert on it. We all know that we can add those exceptions. So if they gain access to kind of, high-level credentials or high-level access within the network, which in this case, if they got in this stage, they definitely do, is that they could kind of say, don't look here. And then that could be where I'm deploying my tools or doing my staging for data exfiltration, etc. There's quite a bit of that. It's auditing and monitoring of security software is important. Are we ensuring that things are getting updates, that they are functional, that there aren't any issues with our security software? Those are harder to detect, but certainly important. On the business emails side, how do they evade detection? Is that they kind of stay under the radar. They use authentication tokens and session cookies, as we mentioned before. They look normal. They, dedicated roles and email services, that allows them to kind of continue with their hiding, like they don't have to show that they don't have to compromise another account, so to speak. And that allows them to continue their movement. And then how do we detect it as anything like suspicious, right? Count activity, are they logging in from different locations? Is it the same origins? Is it the same user agent? Are we seeing changes in that behavior? Those are important to pay attention to in terms of the discovery techniques for these types of trends.
So I know that we've hit around the 1:30 mark, and we just wanted to give a bit of a summary of some of the proactive strategies that we've kind of talked about throughout here. As we've identified some of the trends we saw, we've talked about what we can be doing to kind of mitigate those threats and those risks. So I don't know, Monique, if you want to just give a high-level overview of what's on the sheet here, and then we'll jump into the 2024 predictions for everybody.
So there's a lot here, and it's quite a bit to do. So I won't dive into it, but really it's kind of like, do we have the right technologies in place? Do we have a security monitoring solution in place? If you can't invest in anything, invest in security monitoring solutions that provides you holistic monitoring. I think that's important, so that we can do that. How do we minimize our threat surface? So, again, limiting external services. How to, ensuring we don't allow a threat actor a way to get in. Vulnerability and patch management, whether it's external facing or internal, is important. Obviously, in terms of backup management, does help in terms of data protection and recovery, and obviously secure authentication. On the people side, I won't dive into a lot of that, but it's about education. Really having a strong cybersecurity culture and explaining the risks to our employees so that they know, and also understanding the risk between corporate and non-corporate devices connecting to your network. If I allow my employees to connect via their personal devices to the network, there's another vector here that I cannot monitor or I do not have access to. So there's a bit more controls to consider in that space. From a process and preparation policies, I would say an incident response plan. That is just kind of practicing for a race before you have to run it. So really, it's the best way to kind of prepare yourself so that we're not panicked. All of your informational security policies, acceptable use policies, password policies, all of those come into place when it comes to processes and plans to help prepare. So it's a lot to do, though, right? So this is just the top of that kind of that to-do list, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It's not a short list, but we wanted to try to give everybody a holistic idea of what they could do kind of across these pillars to put themselves in the best position possible. All right, so let's get into predictions for 2024. So definitely like patterns, right? We kind of see the same patterns again and again in many ways. And I think that, if the threat actors are finding success while they're doing something, until there's a big blocker to that, we are going to see some of the same stuff that we saw in 2023, but then some newness, especially with, the giant AI elephant in the room. I think that's going to kind of color everything. Do you want to get into that a bit, Monique?
I'm not a fortune teller, so but I would say, nothing is going to stop cyber criminals from using ransomwares and extortion techniques to kind of get money, right? That is the end goal, and they're kind of continue to adapt to whatever security solutions are in place. So it is always a race between us and them. So I think we will continue to see that. We'll definitely continue to see social engineering attacks and phishing attacks, and I think we're going to see more complexity there. So there's a good question here about the use of AI. I think we're going to see more of that there, because it's all about crafting of messages and being able to kind of lure a victim into clicking on a link by sending a very legitimate sounding email. And it's not simply reset your password or your mailbox size has reached its limit. I think we're going to see some more in that, and definitely in terms of the techniques that they're going to use and the development of techniques, AI will play a big portion. I also think as a lot of companies move their services to the cloud, so as we're moving to, from I'll say on-premises hosted services, accounting software, etc., that is being moved to the cloud, that those applications are going to have the information that threat actors can use for extortion. So that doesn't stop them from trying also to kind of gain access to your accounting software that's in the cloud. And then I have all that confidential financial data for your clients. And then I can that becomes a way to extort, publication of sensitive informations or contracts. So I think that will continue. There's a challenge there, I think, will be for forensic investigators in that space, is that not all these cloud services have good logging or the same level of loggings as we've seen in other services. So there's there'll be, I think, a bit of a growth period there potentially. But that's something to watch. But like, I do see AI is gonna change the world, just like, people are looking at AI for good cybersecurity practices and how it can help us there. It's also, how does it help a threat actor? That I think it will impact all of that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a bit of a brave new world. We did have somebody ask, just as a small company, if you have a limited budget, and as we know, sometimes the security monitoring can be a bit more on the pricey side. Can you give them maybe a couple tips on what to focus on to protect themselves from threats if they have limited budgets with which to work?
Yeah, so I would say, I would say, like, invest in cybersecurity solutions. So how do I put monitoring in place? Because I cannot maybe have all of those things in place at the same time. If I had limited budget, then I would say, is my cybersecurity solution able to look at what, kind of the static things that we know threat actors do and use, but it's about what kind of things do we, the behavioral things. So, if I'm, somebody comes to Field Effect and says, I'm interested in your product, can you help me? I should be able to explain to them, this is how my product kind of defends against the threat actor techniques. And so those, I think that would be what I would look for, is like knowing the threat. And hopefully this session is helpful in that. And then kind of asking the right questions of the cybersecurity product that I have in place. But that's what I would start. And then really, the list that we shared is quite high level, but it can be it will help kind of look at the minimum things we want to do. There's a lot more that can be done, but that's where I would start if I had a small company to protect.
Yeah, and like a lot of the policy things that you can put in place, right, aren't necessarily like, they're time consuming, but not necessarily high cost, right? So that's like a good place where you can also start.
Yeah.
I do have a question here. It says, do you recommend to run more than one EDR on systems, defense in depth, or limit to one that you trust?
Should I have two EDRs? Some organizations have that, that could work. So there's a couple of things, I'll say pros and I'll say cons against that. Now you as an organization have to monitor two things. And two sets of alerts or reporting that's coming from those systems, and that could be quite heavy. I would say really get to learn the EDR that you're considering and see what is really good for my business and how I operate, and the level of I'll say, like, how large is my IT team, and is my IT team, do they know enough about cybersecurity to be able to do all of these things? So there comes a weight with that. Personally, obviously I know Covalence well. This is what I trust. I think that's kind of what I would look for. Just kind of one at a personal level. Monique speaking is like, I would look for just one, just because I don't want to chase too many things down. If there is something, that's what I would look at for me. Pick one that you trust and use that one.
Because we have seen that challenge, right, for clients as well, where it's they kind of get lost in the alerts, right, in the sea of alerts, and they sometimes don't catch something as soon as they could have, because the complexity of their security stack has in some way kind of created a pause in them at least finding the initial issue.
Certainly, it can be overwhelming, right? We do see that, right? I see that a lot, not from obviously existing clients, Covalence clients, but I see that in IRs and how there's a panic, and we had this solution that told us this, and this solution told us that, and we don't know where to start. And that's the one thing we want to avoid. And I think it is really about what is the right solution for my company, for what my team's expertise are, for my team size. And how do I get to know this solution to be able to trust it? And I realized that would be harder for companies who don't know the solution, and they have to kind of trust very initially. But ask in-depth questions. Take this and say, how do you help me protect from these types of attack, and what can you do in that space? Those are the good questions to ask to give you that kind of level of trust that you want in a cybersecurity solution.
That's great. So I do see one other one here about if there's other aspects of AI that worry you from a cybersecurity perspective. I can speak to this a bit because I had to write a thought piece on this. And I think when I did research for this within the company, one of the things that we were talking about is there's still going to be a struggle to do the basics really well. And even though the threat actors are going to be developing this tooling, and they have, and we're seeing it, a lot of it is really just going to be about kind of like how we use AI, right? They're going to optimize their processes. So a lot of it is going to be them looking for, the same ways to get in, those same initial accesses, but they're going to have better tools to be able to find it quicker and leverage it more quickly. I do think that AI is going to affect a lot of different aspects. Like from a client point of view, for us and our clients, we really want our clients to still be focusing on getting kind of some of that core baseline cybersecurity in place. And also the thing that keeps me up at night, I will say from an AI perspective, is all the people that start to use AI to write code and write software and products. And that I'm worried about this initial, just flooding of vulnerable software, but I try not to think about it. Monique, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think that's pretty good. You've summarized it quite well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the thing of nightmares. Listen, I don't see any more questions here in the chat. I think I've addressed them all. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. We certainly appreciate your time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.